Friday, May 27, 1927. It's been almost 2 weeks since the death of the 26-year-old columnist Ellen Jennifer Stillwell. The police made no comments regarding their investigation into her death other than to state that she was found deceased in the backyard of her home. My colleagues and I at the paper found this to be very peculiar, as she was a very fit young woman with no known health problems. Her death must be more involved than the public is being told. Ellen and I were good friends, as both of us worked for the local newspaper, the Arkham Advertiser. Ellen was a practical and resourceful woman who would stop at nothing to get to the bottom of a story. She had covered several high-profile exclusives over her brief career, including an exposé with Captain Lindbergh prior to his historic transatlantic flight. As the days passed with no official report, I called on one of my contacts at the city morgue. My favorite spy at the coroner's office was a short, bespectacled technician named Albert Elgin. I could always count on Albert to swap me some hush-hush information for a few photos of a flapper dressed in a skimpy negligee. Albert told me that Ms. Stillwell's body had been covered with large puncture wounds from her neck down to her feet, and that her bloodstream was overflowing with an unknown neurotoxin. He told me that immediately following the autopsy, the coroner had been called into a private meeting with the mayor, the chief of police, and several members of the Bureau of Investigation. He emerged from the gathering in a severely shaken and agitated state. The next morning, he issued his autopsy report, and it inexplicably listed Ellen's death as natural causes. The report included no mention of the puncture wounds or the neurotoxins in her blood. A cover-up was at hand, and it was being perpetrated by the powers that be. In the days leading up to Ellen's death, I noticed she had become more and more withdrawn and distant. She appeared to be haunted by something that both intrigued and frightened her. 2 days after her death, a large envelope appeared in my mailbox. I immediately recognized the handwriting on the envelope as Ellen's. It was postmarked the day she died. Inside was a handwritten letter, along with countless maps and hundreds of scraps of notes. The letter stated,
"Daryl, I no longer know who I can trust. I'm convinced that a group of strange men are following me. I spotted several of them talking to the chief of police, so I cannot involve anyone from local law enforcement. I'm certain that it must be related to a story I've been researching for the last 6 months. I've included all of my research and the contact information of a G-man named Roland Banks. If something happens to me, you must continue my investigation. Once you read through the research I've collected, I'm sure you will agree. All my best, Ellen."
I spent the rest of the evening perusing the maps and research documents that Ellen collected, and it told an astonishing and frightening tale. An ancient cult exists that dates back to the time of the Babylonian Empire. Somehow, it has survived into modernity. Its members include some of the most powerful and influential individuals in the world, including political, financial, and religious leaders. Their goal is to destabilize the governments of the world and usher in a new world order. Their efforts have already begun, as they have successfully fomented revolutions in Russia, Germany, Italy, and China. But there is a larger, more pervasive issue that remains hidden. This cult is somehow tied to the Mesoamerican deities of Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan, and the East Asian dragon deities of China and Japan. Interestingly, reports have just emerged from Japan which speak of a giant feathered creature flying over the Japanese countryside. I've traveled to Batavia to pick up the trail where Ellen left off. I can only hope that my efforts are not too late, and that this global conspiracy can be exposed and stopped.
Welcome to the Solo Gamers Club. Join me tonight as we travel back to the roaring 1920s, where we will investigate the cosmic horrors of H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu Mythos, as we play Eldritch Horror. Let's start by drawing a Prelude card. Preludes were first introduced in the Mountains of Madness expansion, and they slightly modify the playstyle of any game. Prelude effects always modify the game before setup. They make the beginning of the game a bit more difficult by creating a few extra hurdles at the start, but they usually allow the investigators to gain other effects to make up for this. I love the Prelude cards as they essentially require the players to form a unique strategy for every game. The card is entitled Written in the Stars. I've changed the flavor text a bit to match our backstory, and it reads, "Preparations were made by those that came before, and for that you are thankful. But the prophesied time is at hand, and gratitude is the last thing on your mind. You study the journal and notes that were passed down to you by Ellen. The complicated diagrams chart the movement of stars and other celestial entities over the course of hundreds of years, but all the patterns point to one thing: total annihilation. Your knowledge of these facts makes you vulnerable. The despair of predetermination weighs heavily upon you, but it also makes you stronger. Forewarned, as they say, is forewarned." So we get a benefit. We're going to retreat the doom by 3. The normal starting doom for this ancient old one is 10. So it's going to be set at 13. And also, during the game, we're going to play with the top gate of the gate stack revealed. And the negative aspects of this are going to be that when the omen advances to the omen that corresponds to the color of the revealed gate on the gate stack, the doom track will advance by 1. So in this case, Buenos Aires has a blue omen symbol. So when it advances to that symbol, the doom track will drop by 1. And now we're going to take a look at our investigators and their capabilities. I initially intended to play with the personal missions for each of the heroes, but I think we're going to pass on using those. I think this game is going to be difficult enough as it is. So I think rather than overcomplicate things, we're going to place those personal missions back into the box. Made a random roll, and it determined that Daryl Simmons will be our lead investigator. Daryl Simmons is a photographer. He has a lore of 1, influence of 3, observation 4, strength of 2, and a will of 3. He starts with 7 health and 5 sanity. His active special ability is to look at the top 5 cards of the asset deck and put them back in any order. Then discard any number of cards from the reserve. That's a very valuable ability. That's great. That's going to help us. Also, his passive ability, roll 1 additional die when resolving a test during a location encounter or a research encounter if you are on a city space. So we're definitely going to want to have Daryl operate in city locations if possible. He begins the game with a camera, and it says once per round, when you spend a clue, you may gain 1 clue. So that's good. It also has a card, a task called Seek the Truth. Whenever you gain a clue during a research encounter, spawn 1 clue. Then you may spend 3 clues and discard this card to advance the active mystery by 1. All right, that's a pretty good task. Our next investigator is the farmhand, Hank Sampson. He has a lore of 1, influence of 2, observation 3, strength of 4, and will of 3. He begins the game with a massive 8 health and only 4 sanity. His active ability is to test strength. If he passes, he can discard 1 monster on his space with a toughness less than or equal to the test result. Well, that's pretty good. His passive ability is you do not resolve the will test during a combat encounter unless you lose health from the strength test. And he begins the game with one item. It's a sledgehammer that will allow him to gain +1 to strength and +2 to strength during combat encounters. So that's a pretty good card. Our next investigator is Monterey Jack, the archaeologist. He begins the game with 7 health and 5 sanity. He has a lore of 2, influence of 2, observation 3, strength of 4, and a will of 2. His active ability is he may discard 1 artifact to retreat doom by 1, or discard the top card of the Expedition Encounter deck and perform 1 additional action. He has a passive ability that says after resolving an Expedition Encounter, he gains 1 relic unique asset. That's very powerful. He starts with 2 items. One is a bullwhip. It'll gain him +1 strength during combat encounters, and it also allows him to re-roll 1 die when resolving a combat test, a strength test during a combat encounter. His other item is a treasure map. It's a trinket. When you gain this card from the deck, place 1 random clue face up on this card. After resolving a location encounter or an expedition encounter on that space, flip this card. Well, the location is revealed to be space 11, and that's a sea space in the South Atlantic area. And finally, we have the G-Man, Roland Banks. Roland starts the game with 7 health and 5 sanity. He has a lore of 2, influence of 2, observation 4, strength of 2, and a willpower of 3. His active ability is he can set aside any number of service assets from the reserve. And then his passive ability is once per round during the action phase, you or another investigator may gain 1 service asset that you set aside, discard 1 card from the reserve, or spawn 1 clue. He begins the game with 2 items, a Mauser C96, which gains him +2 during combat encounters to strength, and he may re-roll 1 die when resolving a strength test during a combat encounter, so that's a good weapon. He also has a Agency Secrets unique asset, and as an action he can test influence. If he passes, he strikes a deal with the agency to assist one another. He's able to flip that card for some result. So those are the investigators we're going to begin the game with. And now we'll move on to the Ancient Old Ones. As you may have deduced from the prologue, we will face off against Yig, the father of serpents. We'll begin by consulting the setup portion of his card, and we're instructed to set aside 6 cultists and 1 serpent people monster, as well as the Yig special encounter cards. Examining the cultists, we find them to be potentially very dangerous, as our investigators are bitten and will gain a poison condition if they lose any health while combating them. This means we're going to need to either raise our strength of the characters or provide them with weapons that will provide bonuses to strength. And then we also will notice that Yig has a reckoning effect, and it could be quite problematic, as it not only spawns a cultist on the board, but if left unattended, they will eventually advance the doom track by 1. And finally, if we examine the first stage of the Mythos deck, it looks to be quite harsh. We have a 25% chance of drawing a rumor card during the first turn, and a 50% chance of drawing a reckoning during that first stage. And now we're going to examine our first mystery, and it's entitled The Winged Serpent. Eons ago, Yig unleashed the great dragon, Mapo no Ryugen, to punish the heretical serpent people of the continent of Mu. Now she flies again to dispense Yig's wrath. When this card enters play, spawn the Winged Serpent epic monster in Tokyo. At the end of the Mythos phase, if the Winged Serpent epic monster has been defeated, solve this mystery. So we're going to have to eventually combat that Winged Serpent. So we're going to take a closer look at its capabilities. And we see that the winged serpent has a will -1 test as the sanity test, has a horror value of 2, and the combat portion of it is a -2 strength test, has 4 damage, and we find out that its toughness is going to be equal to the number of investigators plus 2, so that's a total of 6 toughness. This is going to be a tough one. It also says if you lose health from the strength test, gain a poisoned condition. So this is going to be a very tough epic monster that we need to defeat in order to solve our first mystery. The game is now set, and we'll start with Daryl Simmons, our lead investigator, with his action phase. All right, Daryl Simmons is in Batavia, Dutch East Indies, space 20. It's a city location, and that is good for him because he rolls an additional die when resolving a test during a location encounter or research encounter on a city space. So we want Daryl to be operating in city locations if we can. Now he has a ability that says as an action he can look at the top 5 cards of the asset deck and put them back in any order. Then discard any number of cards from the reserve. We're going to definitely need some heavy-duty weapons to combat that winged serpent in Tokyo. So I think we're going to make use of Daryl's his active ability, and that's going to help us to try to cycle in some more powerful weapons cards into the reserve. Right now we really don't have any combat styled units in the reserve, so, or cards I should say, in the reserve. So we're going to use, I think, his active ability, and so we're going to make a component action using his active ability that allows us to look at the top 5 cards of the asset deck and put them back in any order. So let's do that. And those are the top 5 cards in the asset deck. Obviously the Holy Spear, it's an magical relic weapon, gains +4 to strength during combat encounters. That's going to definitely be placed on the top. And there's also a couple of allies, an arcane scholar and a treasure hunter. So we'll definitely put those to the top of the list. And then a trinket and a tome. One thing we do lack with this outfitting of characters is we have little to no magic ability. The highest lore value we have on any of the characters is 2. So we have a definite deficit when it comes to magic in this game. So I'm going to reset those cards. Holy Spear will be on top. The allies will come in next, and then the trinket and the tome will follow suit after that. We'll put those back into the deck. And the next part of that active ability is to discard any number of cards from the reserve. So I think we're going to get rid of the Profane Tome, the Chief Inspector, and the Ritual Candles, and we'll replace those with new cards from the asset deck. And those are the new cards in the reserve: Holy Spear, Treasure Hunter, and Arcane Scholar. And then as Daryl's second action, I think I'm going to have him focus. So we'll have him gain a focus token. And we'll add that focus token to Daryl's display, and we'll move on to Hank Sampson. Hank Sampson is located in Dallas, Texas, in North America. Now Hank is he has a pretty good ability at his strength ability is good, and that would make him, combined with his sledgehammer, would give him a pretty good 6 dice he'd be rolling during a strength test. So I think he might be our man to face off that winged serpent in Tokyo. So I think what I'm going to do is start him moving towards the Far East. So I think he's going to start with a move action. We'll move him from Dallas, Texas to San Francisco. So Sampson arrives in San Francisco, and I think we'll have him perform a focus action, and he's going to gain a focus token. So we'll have him add that focus token to his card, and that's going to end his action turn. We'll move on to Monterey Jack, the archaeologist. He's at the Pyramids of Giza in Egypt. And Monterey Jack, he's definitely good at dealing with the expeditions, so I think we're going to try to get him to Rome, and then he'll eventually undertake that expedition there. It says here on his passive ability, after resolving an expedition encounter, gain 1 relic unique asset. So I think that might be a good thing for Monterey Jack. So we're going to start him out with a move action. He's going to take the sea route from the pyramids to Rome. And then as a second action, we're going to have Monterey do a focus action. That'll gain him a focus token. We'll add that to his display, and that will close out his action phase. We'll move on to our final investigator, Roland Banks. Roland is in San Francisco. And Roland, I think, will start out in San Francisco with a focus action. He'll gain a focus token. We'll add that to his display. And then I think Roland is going to attempt that Agency Secrets unique asset card that he has. That card says, action, test, influence. If you pass, you strike a deal with the agency to assist one another. Flip this card. I don't know what that is going to be, but I think we'll give that a try. So Roland is going to test his influence. Now he has an influence currently of 2, and he does have a focus token. So Roland's going to do his influence test, and he'll be able to roll 2d6. His roll is a 3 and a 6, so he's successful, and we're able to flip the card and see what we gain from that. And the card reads, Agency Secrets. You hear the ticking of their watches before you see them. The agents soon have you in a hypnotic trance. You wake up to find that you have been altered. Resolve 1 effect of your choice. You may spend 1 health to gain 1 talent condition, then flip this card, or improve 1 skill of your choice. You may discard any number of your conditions and then discard this card. All right, well, we'll think about that. Well, I think we're going to take the option of improving 1 skill of our choice, and then we are going to discard, if we had any conditions, we'd be able to discard those and then discard the card. Now, I could save that card, and for an event that we do get a condition, that would be a good way to get rid of that card. I should really think about that a little bit more carefully. Yeah, I'm going to revise that. I think I'm going to go with the first option, and we're going to spend 1 health to gain a talent condition. So that will reduce Roland down from 7 to 6 health, and then he's going to gain a talent. And the talent is revealed to be resilient. Once per round, when you would lose health, you may test strength. If you pass, prevent the loss of up to 2 health, and then flip the card. All right, that's a pretty good talent, so we'll add that to his display. And that's going to complete Roland Banks's first action. I'm sorry, that actually completes Roland's second action. And now we're going to move to the encounter phase. We resolve the encounter phase in order, beginning with our lead investigator, Daryl Simmons. He's in Batavia, so he's going to draw a generic city card and resolve that encounter. And the card says, the police report that people are being abducted by a monster dwelling in the sewer system. Wandering through the underground tunnels, you are suddenly attacked by a deep one. Test strength. All right, well, we're going to do a strength test. Daryl's strength is currently at a 2. That'll allow Daryl to roll 2d6. And Daryl rolled 2 and a 2, so that's a failure. We do have a focus token, but I think we're just going to accept the failure. And it says here, if you fail, lose 1 health from the struggle. So that's going to reduce Daryl from a 7 down to a 6. And that's going to complete Daryl's encounter phase. We'll move on to Hank Sampson in San Francisco. And Hank Sampson is in San Francisco. We have the option of taking the North American card San Francisco from that encounter deck, or we could take a generic city encounter. I think we'll try the San Francisco encounter. And that encounter reads, the city's Vigilance Committee shows you how it watches the city. Improve observation. Okay, that's good. That is going to improve Hank Sampson's observation from 3 to 4. We'll give him a token to mark that. And then we'll continue reading. You try to convince them that the occult exists. Test influence -1. All right, Hank Sampson has an influence of 2 only, so that's going to reduce him down to a single die. We'll make that test. Hank rolls a 2, so that's a failure. Now he does have a focus token he could spend. We'll see what the effects of this are. If you pass, they offer to teach you what they know. Gain 1 talent condition. If you fail, you begin to doubt yourself, impair will. Well, the focus token would offer us a reroll of that die. We'd have a 1 in 3 chance of turning that from a failure into a success. I think we're going to pass. We'll accept the impairment on the will, which will reduce his will from 3 down to 2, and we'll keep the focus token for future use. So we've marked Hank Sampson with his impairment token. He also has his improvement token for observation. We'll move on to our next character, Monterey Jack. He's in Rome. Monterey Jack is in Rome. He has an option of either a location encounter or a token encounter. If he chooses the location encounter, he can choose a European encounter for Rome, a generic city encounter, or he can do the token encounter for the expedition, and that's going to be his choice. So we're going to reveal that expedition card and see what it says. And the card reads, you're granted access to the Passetto di Borgo, the passage that connects Vatican City to Castel Sant'Angelo. You carefully examine the walls of the secret walkway to find access to hidden chambers. Test observation. Monterey has an observation of 3, so that will allow him to roll 3 dice for the test. Monterey has a good roll. He's got a 5 and a 6. He's got 2 successes. Okay, we'll read on. You find a door to a cell covered in magic writing. Gain 1 clue. You ask the priests about the purpose of the cell. Test influence -1. All right, so we've gained a clue token, and we're going to do a influence test -1. His influence, unfortunately, is a 2, so that'll reduce it to a 1 die. We've given Monterey his clue token. He's going to make his influence -1 test. He'll be rolling 1 die. And unfortunately, Monterey rolled a 1. I think we're just going to accept it the way it is. It says here, if you fail, the prison horrifies you, lose 1 sanity. So that's going to reduce Monterey Jack's sanity level from 5 down to 4. And that's going to end his encounter. But he does have a passive ability. It says, after resolving an expedition encounter, gain 1 relic unique asset. So we'll find out what that is. And Monterey finds a magical relic called Stone Calendar. Item, magical relic. When you gain this card from the deck, you may move the omen counterclockwise by 1 without advancing doom. Well, that's actually could be beneficial to us. We have that issue with the omen track and our Prelude card. And that reads, when the omen advances to the omen that corresponds to the top of the gate, advance the doom by 1. So I think it would be beneficial for us to move that omen track back 1. So we're going to retrograde that omen track back 1 space to the left. And as that's not an advancement, that ability on the Prelude card will not kick in. So we'll add the Stone Calendar to Monterey Jack's tableau, and that is going to end his turn. We'll find out where the expedition moves to, though, before we conclude this part. And we discover that the expedition now moves to Shanghai, China. That'll complete Monterey Jack's encounter phase. We'll move on to Roland Banks. Roland is in San Francisco, and he's going to do a location encounter using the North American encounter deck for San Francisco. And that encounter reads, "You dream of a native man dressed in bearskin. He speaks an odd language. Test lore." All right, Roland Banks' lore is currently at 2. So he would have to do a 2d6 test of his lore ability, and we'll take care of that right now. And Roland's roll is a success, so we'll read on. If you pass, his words guide you, gain 1 talent condition, and improve 1 skill of your choice. Well, that's absolutely fantastic. We're going to use that to improve Roland Banks' strength. That will give him an increase from 2 to 3. He also gained a talent condition that's called Practiced. Once per round, you may roll 1 additional die and re-roll up to 1 die when resolving a test. If you fail that test, flip the card. All right, well, that is a nice safety valve card to have for him in the event he has a failure. We'll add that to his tableau, and that is going to conclude Roland Banks' encounter phase. We'll move on to the Mythos phase. And our Mythos card is going to be a card called Ghostly Chanting. We begin with a spawning clues. We're going to spawn 2 clues per our icon reference card. Clues will be placed in space 19, which is near Vladivostok in Siberia, and space 10, which is French West Africa, Dakar. Our next step is we place a rumor token in the Himalayas. Next, we place 5 Eldritch tokens on the card. And the card reads, "On the plateau of Leng, several ruined monasteries have begun to reverberate with a strange chanting noise. No matter how far you travel, the sound never quite disappears from your consciousness." The event is Ghostly Chanting, an ongoing rumor. As an encounter, an investigator on the Himalayas may dispel the ghostly chants. He may spend clues equal to the number of investigators to solve this rumor. When there are no Eldritch tokens on this card, solve this rumor. During a reckoning effect, each investigator impairs his highest skill, then discards 1 Eldritch token from this card. All right, so that is an ongoing rumor card, and that is going to complete the first turn. We're able to move our first investigator marker if we choose to. And I think we're going to move the first investigator marker from Daryl Simmons to Monterey Jack. And that's going to complete the first turn. So that was definitely unfortunate for us to draw a rumor card on the first turn. That's going to complicate things quite a bit. We're going to need to get an investigator with at least 4 clue tokens. Right now, the only investigator with a clue is Monterey Jack. He has 1. All right, we'll begin our next turn. We'll begin the next turn with an action phase, and we'll start with our lead investigator, Monterey Jack. He is in Rome. There's a couple of clue tokens within a fairly close distance to where Monterey is. There's one in Dakar, French West Africa, space 10, and another one in the heart of Africa. So I think we'll try to use Monterey Jack to recover those clue tokens. We'll begin with him in Rome for his first action, and we'll have him prepare for travel. And I'll have him acquire a ship ticket. Monterey acquires the ship ticket. We'll place that on his card, and then he's going to conduct a move action using the sea lane connecting Rome to space 10. And Monterey travels to Dakar, French West Africa, and that will end his action phase. We'll move on to Roland Banks. Roland is in San Francisco, and I think we're going to attempt to get him to Siberia. There is a clue token located there north of Japan. So I think what we'll do is we will begin Roland's action phase by preparing for travel, and he's going to gain a ship ticket. Then Roland is going to conduct a move action. He's going to use his movement to travel to Alaska using a sea lane. And then while in Alaska, he's going to spend his ship ticket, and he's going to continue traveling to Space 19 in Siberia. And that's going to complete Roland's action phase. We'll move on to Daryl Simmons. He's currently in Batavia, Dutch East Indies. And Daryl's first action is going to be to gather resources, so he's going to gain a resource token. We'll place that resource token on Daryl's card. And I think as his second action, Daryl's going to acquire assets that allow him to do a influence test. And depending upon the number of successes he has, he can purchase items from the reserve. His current influence is 3. And Daryl rolls 2 successes, and he's going to spend a resource token. That resource token is going to give him another success that gives him a total of 3 successes, and he is going to purchase the Holy Spear from the reserve. The Holy Spear is a magical relic weapon, and it's going to gain +4 strength during combat encounters, which will be very useful in eventually combating that winged serpent. So we'll add that to his card total. And that's going to complete Daryl Simmons' action. We'll move on to Hank Sampson. He's currently in San Francisco. And I think we're going to have Hank Sampson move along to the same location as Roland Banks. That would place him within 1 space of Tokyo. And if we can get all of our equipment together, we'd probably want to have Hank Sampson be our lead on attacking that winged serpent. So we're going to conduct a prepare for travel action for Hank Sampson. He's going to acquire a ship ticket. And then Hank is going to do a move action. He's going to move from San Francisco to Juneau, Alaska. And then while in Juneau, he's going to spend that ship ticket and continue on traveling along the sea lane towards Siberia. And he'll meet up with Roland Banks. So Hank Sampson has traveled to Siberia. He meets up with Roland Banks. That's going to conclude our action phase, and we'll move on to the encounter phase. We'll begin the encounter phase with our lead investigator, Monterey Jack. He's going to attempt a token encounter, and he's going to do a research encounter in Dakar, French West Africa. Dakar is a wilderness space, so we'll read the wilderness portion of the research card. And it states, legions of snakes slither past you. If you are on an expedition space, you cannot escape them. Gain a poison condition. You look for a particular serpent. Test influence -2. All right, we are not on an expedition location, so we're going to make that observation -2 roll. Monterey Jack's observation level currently is a 3, and so that will give him only 1 die to use for the test. Monterey rolled a 5, that's a success, and we'll read on. It says, if you pass, you find a snake with a crescent on its head. Gain this clue and 1 additional clue. Well, that's fantastic. So we're going to gain the clue on space 10 and an additional clue from the draw bag. That gives him a total of 3 clues. And we'll move on to Roland Banks' encounter phase. Roland is in space 19. There is a clue token available there, so he can either take a location encounter on the space or a token encounter, in this case research encounter, and that's what he's going to choose to do. He'll take the research encounter. And that space is also a wilderness location, and it reads, dozens of Yig's children are asleep around a gigantic snake den. Gain this clue. You may try to sneak inside to find the source of this horror. we have to conduct an observation -2 test. Now Roland's observation right now is a 4. Roland rolled a 1 and a 2, so that's a failure. Roland has a special talent called Practiced. And his Practiced talent says once per round you may roll 1 additional die and re-roll up to 1 die when resolving a test. If you fail that test, flip this card. So we're going to get to roll an extra die and possibly re-roll one of the dice we've already rolled. The extra die that he rolled is a 6, so we're going to pass, and we'll continue reading on our wilderness encounter. If you pass, you find a relic on a pedestal in the center of a cave. Gain the Cursed Sphere artifact. Alright, so we're going to gain the Cursed Sphere artifact. And the Cursed Sphere is an item magical. It says gain +2 to all skills. And then during a reckoning, roll 1 die. On a 1 or 2, gain a curse condition. Alright, we'll add that to his total items. That'll complete Roland Banks' encounter phase. We'll move on to Daryl Simmons. Daryl's in Space 20, that's Batavia, and he's going to conduct a general city encounter. And the card reads, you see a street magician use real magic in his act. Gain 1 glamour spell. During his show, he locks you in a safe. Test willpower -1. Okay, so we're going to gain a glamour spell. So we'll get that from the deck first. So he gains the glamour spell Markings of Isis. Gain +1 to all skills. Once per round, you may re-roll 1 die when resolving a test. During a reckoning phase, test lore -1 and flip the card. So the magician has locked us in a safe. We have to conduct a will -1 test. Daryl Simmons' will is a 3, so that will allow him to roll 2 dice in the test. Now the glamour spell, Markings of Isis, gains us 1 to all skills. So our total skill now is 4 willpower -1. We'll be rolling 3 dice for the test. And Daryl rolled a 2, 3, and a 4, so he has failed. We do have 1 focus token available to us that he could use. And we're going to use our Markings of Isis spell once again. And it says once per round you may re-roll 1 die when resolving a test. So that's what we'll do. And Daryl re-rolls with a 6. That's a success. And it says there, if you pass, you stay calm and emerge to thunderous applause. Recover 2 sanity. Alright, well, Daryl is already at full sanity, so that isn't going to help him. But we did avoid a paranoia condition by using that Markings of Isis spell, so that's great. That will conclude Daryl Simmons' encounter phase, and we'll move on to Hank Sampson. Hank Sampson is in a wilderness base in Siberia, so he's going to conduct a general encounter in that location. And that wilderness general encounter reads, a hermit offers to guide you on a spiritual journey of fasting and meditation. Test willpower. And Hank Sampson's willpower is 3 with a -1 counter on it, so he has a willpower of 2. He'll be able to roll 2 dice. Hank rolls a 1 and a 5, and that's a success, so we'll continue reading. It says, if you pass, you unlock new skills, gain 1 talent condition. All right, we'll draw a talent for him. And that talent is revealed to be elusive. During the encounter phase, you may test observation. If you pass, you may choose an encounter as if there were no monsters on your space. Then flip this card. All right, we'll add that to Hank Sampson's tableau. That will complete the encounter phase, and we'll move on to the Mythos phase. And our Mythos card is revealed to be a yellow card saying arrests made in murder case. And we begin that phase with an Advance the Omen. So our omen track is going to advance from a blue position, star field, to a green comet. Now if we had any green gates on the board, the doom track would be advancing by 1 point for each of those. We have none. The only gate open is a gate in Sydney, and that's red. And next is going to be a reckoning phase. We begin the reckoning phase by resolving the effects in the order of monsters. Now there are no monsters on the board with reckoning effects. We move on to the Ancient One. The Ancient One does have a reckoning effect. And that effect is he will spawn one cultist monster on the active expedition space. That's currently in Shanghai, China. If there were 2 or more monsters on the space, that would advance the doom by 1. Fortunately for us, that's the first monster that is on Shanghai, so the doom track will not advance, but if we have another one there, when a reckoning effect occurs, the doom track will move down 1. And our next part of resolving the reckoning is Mythos cards. Well, we do have one active card. And that's the card Ghostly Chanting. That's that ongoing rumor. And it says, during a reckoning phase, each investigator impairs his highest skill. Then discard 1 Eldritch token from the card. And unfortunately, that applies to all investigators. Each investigator has to impair his highest value. For Daryl Simmons, that's going to be his observation. That'll move him from 4 down to 3. For Mark Sampson, that's his strength. That moves him from 4 to 3. Monterey Jack is also going to have his strength impaired from 4 to 3. And finally, Roland Banks will have his observation impaired from 4 to 1. So we're going to remove 1 of the Eldritch tokens from the card. That leaves 4 Eldritch tokens remaining on there. And finally, as a part of that reckoning phase, we have to determine possessions and conditions for each of our investigators. Our lead investigator is Monterey Jack. He has 1 item that has a reckoning effect, and that is his stone calendar. And it says, the alignment of the stars is right. Flip this card. We flip the card and it reads Stone Calendar. The starlight illuminates certain reflective materials embedded within the calendar, revealing a glowing message. In a long-forgotten language, spend 1 clue or test lore -1. And then it says if you pass or spend the clue, the message describes a new season that is dawning, and it instructs you how to prepare for this new phase. Gain 1 talent condition, then flip the card. Alright, well, rather than spending the clue, which is kind of precious to us, Monterey is going to make a roll. So he will do a lore -1 test. He has a lore of 2. That'll allow him 1 die. His roll is a 5, and he passed, so that will entitle him to gain a talent condition. And the talent is revealed to be Rugged. You may reroll 1 die when resolving a strength test. Once per round, if you would lose 2 or more health, prevent 1 of that health loss. Then flip the card. Okay, we'll add that to his tableau. Next is Roland Banks. He has 1 item that has a reckoning effect, and that is his Cursed Sphere. It says roll a die. On a 1 or 2, gain a cursed condition. Roland rolls a 5, so he's good with that condition. We're fine with him. Now we have Daryl Simmons. He has 1 item with a reckoning effect, and that is the Markings of Isis spell that he just received. It says test lore -1 and flip the card. Well, unfortunately, Daryl has only a lore of 1, so he'll be rolling the minimum of 1 die for the test. And his roll is a 1, and we'll have to flip the card and see what happens. We have no successes, and that reads, you must focus your mind to maintain the magic. Discard this card unless you spend 1 focus. Well, that's a pretty valuable spell, and I think Simmons will spend the focus token to maintain that spell. Hank Sampson doesn't have any items or conditions with the reckoning effect, so we'll move on the card. The next part of the card is to spawn a gate. As we know, that gate was visible because of our Prelude card, and that it appears in Buenos Aires. The next gate visible is a green gate in San Francisco. Now we'll have to spawn a monster to go with the Buenos Aires gate opening. And that monster is revealed to be a firebug. It has a reckoning effect. Now we move on to the event, and we'll read the flavor text. It says, "You open the door of your hotel to find several stone-faced policemen. There's been a lot of unexplained deaths, and nothing attracts suspicion like being a stranger." Event: each investigator on a city space with a weapon possession tests influence. If he fails, he discards one weapon possession and gains the detained condition. All right. The only investigator on a city location is Daryl Simmons at Batavia, and unfortunately he does have a weapon. That's the Holy Spear. He's going to have to test his influence, and if he fails, he'll have to discard one weapon possession, and unfortunately the only weapon he has is the Holy Spear. So that would be a pretty terrific loss for him. We'll see if he can pass this. His influence is a 3, so he'll be able to roll 3 dice. Now Daryl has the Markings of Isis spell, which gains +1 to all his skills, so that'll raise his influence from 3 to 4. But the other ability it has is once per round, you may re-roll 1 die when resolving a test. He's already used that. I guess a round, I'm assuming, is any point during his turn, whether it be a part of the action phase, encounter phase, or the Mythos phase. I'm going to double check that though. And yes, I was correct. The definition of a round is it consists of an action phase, encounter phase, and Mythos phase. But he does gain the +1 for the Markings of Isis. We'll be rolling 4 dice for the test. And believe it or not, he rolled 2 1s and 2 2s. We failed that. We're going to lose that Holy Spear. It's amazing. That's going to go to the discard pile. And that's going to complete the Mythos phase. We do have the ability to change our lead investigator, but I think I'm going to leave it as Monterey Jack. And I think we're going to end, this ends the phase. We're also going to end the video here, and we'll come back with turn 3 and see what the adventures of our investigators are as they proceed along against Yig, the Father of Serpents. Thanks very much for joining me at the Solo Gamers Club, and we'll see you with our next video. Thanks again, and have a good night.